The fourth value at Trinity is worship. Now, when I say worship, we think of, perhaps you think about the singing time. And that is not necessarily what I'm talking about, because we can get into different discussions about worship in terms of the singing and in terms of that part of our worship service. We could talk about preference and different types of songs, but that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about a deeper thing, and that is this, that, we were created to worship God. Now, in Deuteronomy 6, the Bible says that God has commanded us to love him. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your might. Jesus talks about this in the New Testament, that the greatest commandment is to love God. We're created to love God. And when you think about it, when they think about that, they're like, man, that's an interesting command, to love God. Like, could you imagine if we were commanded to love our spouses, or if we were commanded to love our parents, that we were forced, we had to, it was like a law, it was like a principle? I mean, how real would that be? How authentic would that be? Now, in answering that question, I want to just say that John Piper has been a tremendous source of blessing and teaching for me in this area of worship and giving God glory. Definitely you're going to want to check out his teachings on the glory of God, on worship, and he calls it Christian hedonism, actually. Any kind of teaching like that from John Piper, I want to encourage you to get a hold of that. But this is where I'm coming at, and is a big part of our value system at Trinity, is to understand that we were created for something. In Isaiah chapter 43, it says, "Do not withhold, bring my sons from afar, and my daughters from the ends of the earth. Everyone who is called by my name, whom I created for my glory." You see, we were created for God's glory. We were created to give God glory. We were created to worship God. And there is something that happens when we worship God truly in spirit and in truth, the type of worship that Jesus talks about in the book of John. Something happens in our spirits. And John Piper puts it this way: God is most glorified in us when we are most satisfied in him. In other words, when we give God glory, when we worship him to the fullest extent, we experience our soul's satisfaction to the maximum extent. When we give God highest praise, our soul experiences high satisfaction. Our soul satisfaction and God's glory are not on opposite ends of the spectrum. They are connected. They are connected. It's like two sides to one coin. When we give God glory, we experience maximum life and soul satisfaction. And so with that said, worship at Trinity is huge. It's a huge deal. And it's not just song preference. It's not just the 30 minutes of singing on Sunday mornings. It's talking about the corporate gathering. When we come together, we view it as coming together for God's glory. That it's not just a gathering for the sake of a ritual, that we are coming together as God's people to encounter God's manifest glory, to give him highest praise, the praise that is due his name. And that in turn, we experience our soul's maximum satisfaction. And so worship is huge at Trinity. It's a value that it's when we come together, we are coming together to encounter the beauty and the majesty of God, and that we are a community that experiences God's glory as the chief source of our soul satisfaction. And when that happens, the overflow of an encounter with God's glory is extravagant worship. And at Trinity, we want to be that church that fosters that environment, that atmosphere of worship on our Sunday mornings. Through the praise, through the prayer time, through the observing of the ordinances, communion and baptism, through the preaching, through our corporate fellowship, where we encounter God's glory and we give him the maximum praise, and in turn we experience our maximum soul satisfaction. That is a big part of who we are at Trinity.